approach. And many African countries are today conversing more on matters of integration, harmonizing financial policies, harmonizing economic policies. And indeed, where we have had what you might call truant approaches, the African Union itself is taking action where it suspends nations that are not conforming with proper democratic principles. And there are few that are facing that now. So I see Africa as a land of opportunity. We are getting our act together. A few challenges, no doubt, but it is a continent of opportunity.
Thank you very much, Minister. Mr. Pello?
Yeah, I would like to echo what colleagues have said here very well before. My background is in economics, so basically the GDP and economic growth comes from two different factors. The first one is the population growth, the amount of labor, and that's booming in Africa over the next coming decades. And then the other one is productivity, and that's again on the rising path in Africa. We are seeing a lot of development in urbanization, so that's energy demand, water and waste management systems, circular economy, and those are the topics where actually the Nordics are the most functional societies that are in place. We take pride of our engineering excellence. We are the best in terms of designing electricity networks and how to balance electricity systems. We are the best in terms of city solutions in heating and cooling. Then when it comes to waste management and circular economy, the Nordics are world leading in this regard. So that gives a very fertile ground for developing further our collaboration between the Nordics and the African countries. Then take another megatrend as well. Digitalization is something that's going to transform a lot of the ways how we deal and how business is done. And that's again a tradition that Nordics have in place. We have mobile network network companies, we have the infrastructure, and we have the services as well. And now, as we are seeing that Africa is really developing very fast, you are basically skipping some of the stages in development we've had in the past. So nobody has a landline. You're going to 100% mobile networks, and a lot of commerce and business is already taking place in a more modern way than in Central Europe, for example. So again, that lays a very good basis for us to increase collaboration, and I'm seeing a lot of traction from the Finnish industries towards the African growing economies, or the 5G tasks that are now and that's very good phase of development.
I loved your questions to the last panels. If you have any questions. Minister Mudavdi, earlier this year an extensive trade agreement between EU and Kenya was signed. How can we ensure similar agreement is signed in the future?
Well, first of all, I'm a very happy man, not just on behalf of Kenya, but really on behalf of Africa, that we are now moving to a level where we can have such agreements. And I'm happy that the European Union went further and ratified it in their parliament. 2 weeks ago, the Kenyan parliament has also ratified the agreement. So it is now all systems go. Now, what is important is that we should actually encourage this kind of engagement, because in the case of Kenya, this agreement has now opened an opportunity for us to access 27 European Union countries, duty-free for our exports, or tariff-free, and also quota-free. So now there's a serious agenda on our part to be able to go back and look at the value chains, working with our farmers, working with our manufacturers, so that we can take full advantage of this engagement. So I would say that it should not end with Kenya. And I'm happy to announce here that I think Rwanda has already indicated that they also want to pursue and achieve the same. And it is possible for other countries to be able to achieve that engagement. Yesterday when I spoke, I talked about intra-Africa trade as it stands now. Is about the volume is about 30% amongst ourselves within the country, and 70% of our trade is actually with the outside market, which is good. But we can leverage on that to also grow the intra-African trade and investment. And such agreements as the EPA provide that opportunity. And I think we
implemented. Mr. Lohse?
I mean, those kind of agreements. I used to work 25 years in the foreign ministry, so been working with this for most of my life, and that's really, really important. But I think also especially when we look at the green transition in Africa, we need to start building projects on the ground. We've had so many COP meetings with big multilateral commitments and just energy transition partnerships and national action plans and national investments plans, but the money doesn't really get to the ground, to the projects where they need to be. So just a call for action on the ground on the short term as well. We need to assist each other in starting building this industry, because it will not come with a big blow. I mean, investors will not storm into the country. We need, said by the previous panel, we need to show in practice that those projects are profitable projects, that they come with a great return for investors, and we need to show that in practice and in real life. Otherwise, this is not going to happen, no matter how many multilateral agreements we have.
Well, Iceland is, as a non-EU member, to that, but I could mention that, of course, the EFTA countries also have some free trade agreements in Africa, but it would be very nice to have more of them. We already have with Tunisia and Morocco and Egypt, and but we would definitely. It would also be a win-win to have more of them. Iceland, Norway, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland. So it could add to the European family with a closer cooperation with Africa. But of course, Africa also needs capital. So without that, if you have the resources and you have the political will and you have the framework, but eventually you can't. You have to have the capital as well.
Yeah, and let me get back to the capital in just a second. But Mr. Pellew, these agreements, how important are they in securing sustainable infrastructure and green transition on the African continent?
Yeah, I would say they are very important, and they're important for two reasons. The first one is, of course, that they build security. As those agreements have been made, it really is a very influential and powerful message that these countries are taking seriously action on climate and investments. So improving the partnerships through these agreements is very important. And then, of course, the second factor is more of a marketing perspective. Once those agreements have been made, it actually allows us to highlight some specific countries that have those agreements in place. So making that as an attraction point for Nordic companies and broader, even more broadly, companies to tap into the potential that those countries have to offer. And then when you combine that with an efficiently tailored foreign direct investment and FDA packages, that's a good combination to actually start really putting those agreements into action.
Okay. Let's go down the money track, because the African Development Bank estimates between 130 and 170 billion dollars investment is required for infrastructure development each year in Africa, and that leaves a gap around 100 billion dollars. How do we bridge that gap?
Well, is that to me?
Well, yeah, now it is.
I think one of the things is that we need to grow our private sector. That is really the long and short of it. So as we have efforts at bilateral level, we are looking at what standards, what are the issues, what is the environment that we are looking at. And that, for instance, the standards in Europe are extremely high in certain aspects, whether it is in terms of as it affects the greening, as it deals with aspects of human rights issues that relate to how you treat the labor and so forth. So all this becomes a confluence of important critical benchmarks that we must meet. And that is what will attract the private sector into the African continent. Over and above that, we then will have to look at how to improve our own domestic revenue generation, because as we expand the private sector base, then we are able to have greater levels of internal revenue. And these are critical because it's a fallacy for us to assume that all our infrastructure is going to be built by our friends or partners outside the continent. The bulk of it ultimately has to be done by ourselves. So the more we grow our private sector, the better it will be for us, and we'll be able to invest in our infrastructure. So that becomes extremely critical. But we can leapfrog. For instance, through digitalization. People like Apple, for instance, are employing about 23 Kenyans in Kenya. They have not migrated, but they're in Kenya, but employed by Apple. Now, this is another way of really broadening and getting resources systematically by sharing technology, making it affordable, and also appropriately skilling the young people in Africa. And I am sure that is where the growth of the private sector will come from.
Thank you. Mr. Lose?
Just coming from the bottom up as an investment living in CIP. And I say for investors, it's only about two things. It's not necessarily about, of course, it's also about CO2 reductions and everything else. But you said it before, the business case has to stack up. It's about risks and it's about returns. That's the only thing that matters. So we raise money from institutional investors and they are conservative. And we are investing to be sure that we can actually deliver the risk-adjusted returns. And this is the thing we need to work with. We need to develop the bankable project. And that we can demonstrate, showing that this is where money will actually. And there's a lot we can do to make those projects much more bankable. It's about securing offtake. If African countries investing in their grid infrastructure, cooperation between countries in Africa. One of the reasons why we invested in South Africa is because you can plug into the Southern African power pool, creates completely new possibilities and good prices for the product, those kind of things. And then with authorities in the Nordic countries, for example, that want to help with this, if we could together develop a financial product that could de-risk private investors. For example, taking first loss, if public money were willing to do that, were willing to invest in the development phase of projects. This is where it's super risky and where things don't go according to plan. Those kind of products, if we can develop that, we would be able to unlock much more private capital than we do. And the interest is there. We are currently raising a 3 billion euro fund for investments in growth markets like the African ones. We expect to do that purely on commercial terms, but if you want to go beyond that and getting close to a number like the ones you're mentioning there, we need new financial structures that can unlock this capital, and it's all about risks and returns.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Just 2 points. I mean, of course, for the green transition to truly take off and other infrastructure projects in Africa, the private sector must play a central role. But we also have to have a very strong cooperation with multilateral partners, such as World Bank and Nordic Development Fund. And for example, the Nordic Development Fund has been very active in development of blended finance instruments aimed at attracting private sector financing to African countries. So it is always a cooperation. countries and Africa, and it's also a cooperation between the private sectors and the multilateral systems, where we also need to be more efficient, and that's the path that the World Bank, for example, is definitely on. But just want to mention one other point. In Iceland, we've only been independent for 80 years, and 60 years ago or so, we had the first big long-term contract when we decided to build an aluminium smelter in Iceland, meaning that we got foreign investment into the country, a long-term contract, which meant that we could take the risk on building a hydropower plant, which is the foundation of our growth and sustainable development. So because of that long-term contract, we could also build the grid around the country. So the state did that, but we could, because we had a long-term contract with foreign investment, so we could do a long-term plan. So it was also a cooperation, which is, I think, and I believe, always the key for both Europe and Africa.
New markets always attract Wild West gold-digging kind of quick profit investors. How do we make sure that investment in infrastructure is actually truly sustainable?
The foundation is clear. That's why I emphasize the strong and clear framework. That's like if countries want to do their homework, I would say start there. So the rules are obvious from the beginning, and that means that the wild cowboys that are not there for good, they will look in a different direction, I believe.
Thank you. Mr. Pellew, same question.
Yeah, and that's of course always the issue. When you have a very attractive market that's developing fast, you have these cowboy players as well. And that's of course where the collaboration between the governments, both kind of inbound and outbound, and then companies themselves is really important. And that's where I think the Nordics again are outshining. Our kind of relationships between the governments and companies are pretty straightforward. Our business practices are very sustainable, and Nordic countries are consistently ranked amongst the most sustainable companies in the globe. So that's where I see that again there's a huge potential for collaboration between the Nordic and the African countries because of our ability to bring on board a good collaboration with governments and then engage in very sustainable and long-term business relationships. And as Thori said, it's about the longevity of these investments. We're talking about infrastructure that's with a lifetime of 40+ years. So hence, kind of creating stable conditions and de-risking those investments is of crucial importance.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I asked the last panel, because we have today a focus on the actual action, leaving this meeting today, what will you do differently? Mr. Lose, we'll start with you.
We'll just keep our nose to the grindstone, keep developing projects on the ground and invest in those projects. We'll continue our work. We have excellent cooperation with, for example, the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs on helping us understanding and navigate the market out there. We will continue our cooperation also with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also the World Bank and some of the other global institutions on how to create this financial product that can help us raise more money from private investors. That's going to be crucial if we want to get to the numbers there. Because it's also about bigger things than just returns and risks, so, although that's what we do for a living. When we do the calculations, when we do $1 of investments in South Africa, for example, we create 3 times as many CO2 reductions as we do from $1 in Denmark, for example. And trust me, it's much more easy to do business in South Africa than it is in Denmark, but different matter. So we'll just continue doing this, doing it bottom up. I think that's the most important thing, so we can actually demonstrate on the ground that this can be done with healthy returns for investors.
Minister Gulfadottir?
Well, I think actually this morning here is a great example of what we can do differently. Instead of spending most of the time when we meet sitting around in a circle, having our interventions from our talking points, and the hours just pass by, I think it's more important to get actually real to get to know each other and to have a concrete setup like here, where we're also mixing the politicians with the private sector, for them to be able to have personal connection, to then have a follow-up after a meeting like this. And eventually, I'm just a very big believer in personal contacts. With more people-to-people relations, I think we can actually do great things. So being more focused, more concrete, and mixing the private sector and policymakers and politicians more often together, with enough free time to actually talk to each other, to listen to the answer, not only reading from the paper and you're not waiting for any response. I think that would be an excellent development to continue.
Thank you. Minister Mudavdi.
Well, what would we do better? I think we should stop selling fear. Because I think we've been on a journey for too long trying to give the impression that the risks in Africa are insurmountable. But we now need to break away from that and sell Africa and get people to understand Africa as a continent of opportunity. Because the challenges we face are really no different. Because even today, Europe is facing a new kind of challenge with the conflicts that have come to Europe. The Middle East is facing their challenges. So we need to broaden our scope and then see how we can leverage on some of the institutions that can provide risk cover. Within the World Bank, we have the MEGA, which achieves the same. Here, I've actually mingled with one or two people who are able to provide that kind of risk. So it's a question of assessing. And there are good opportunities. And if I give an example of Kenya, for instance, we are today at 93% green energy levels, perhaps the highest that you can easily find within quite a number of countries at this point. It's mainly hydro and mainly geothermal. My sister here is also strong in geothermal in Iceland. And we have an opportunity, for instance, to start looking at the Inga Dam in the DRC more seriously. That would give us maybe 100,000 megawatts of energy. But we are sometimes obsessed in selling fear to the extent that we are not looking at it. But I want to say that Africa has moved a long way. They have institutions that are working. They have legal systems that are working. They have judicial processes that are working. So that even aspects of arbitration on some of the challenges we face, there is a legal mechanism to deal with some of these issues. So the risk that we always perceive, we can move away from it. Let us work together, have more data, have more evidence-based decision-making in terms of the businesses' issues that we want to make. Let us work together and leverage on the technology levels that you have here. We don't have to go and reinvent new technology around the greening aspects. We come to the Nordic countries, you're perfect at it, why don't we pull together? Make it affordable, make these opportunities also affordable to the African continent. And I believe we have the capacity to do so.
So much potential there to be released. Thank you very much, Minister. Mr. Peljo, what would you be doing differently from now on?
Well, I think in terms of goal setting, we've been quite modest in terms of our goals to kind of increase the collaboration and trade between the Nordics and Africa. And we at the Confederation of Finnish Industries, we've shared the same level of goals that DI has also laid out here. We would like to see the trade between the Nordics and Africa at least doubling by the end of this decade. And that's kind of the guiding star towards which we should be now aiming at. And that's where I see my and our Confederation's work is to promote the African opportunities for the Finnish companies and then engage in more detailed and more concrete collaboration between not only the governments but also between the African major companies and then Nordic companies to see where the best potential is. And that's where basically our role in taking us towards the goal of doubling the trade by 2030 is at best.
Her Excellency Minister Gulfadottir, His Excellency Minister Mudavdi, Mr. Lose, Mr. Pellew, thank you very much. Give this panel a big hand. And let's move on to our last session for today. Part of our discussions here today is the vital issue of food value chains. As we confront the challenges posed by climate change, population growth and food insecurity, it's crucial that we work together to build robust and inclusive food systems that ensure the availability of nutritious and affordable food for everyone. This next panel will focus on the solution and the collaboration needed to ensure food security and minimizing the loss across value chains. So, let me welcome on stage His Excellency Espen Barth Eide, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Norway. Give him a hand. Mr. Rasmus Abildgaard, Vice President of Danfoss. Mr. Robin Pedersen, Head of International Trade Development Business in Sweden, and Her Excellency Nancy Tembo, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Malawi. Welcome on stage, Minister Tembo. Well, my opening question, and I will start with you. What do you see as the main barriers to ensure sustainable food value chains, and how do we address them?
This is an incredibly important issue for the world and for Africa. And again, as has been said in other panels, there is enormous potential to do more, to produce much more of the food that is eaten in Africa. It's a question of food security, but in many ways it's also a question of food sovereignty, of food autonomy. But that requires sustained effort to strengthen all the elements of the value chain. The farmer, typically the small farmer, but also small SMBs and larger industries, where Norway has taken a clear stance in its development support, but also increasing its commercial contact to help both the production side, but also the farmer to market issue. And I think this requires an ability to do more microfinance, more strategic thinking of how you increase resilience, how you also make food in, taking into account the climate challenges that we're seeing now, where we will have more heat and less water, and in some places too much water through floods, but typically less. So we need to deal with crops, we need to work with soil health, and I would like to highlight that in only a few days there's an AU meeting on fertilizer and soil health. I think that's incredibly important, because the soil health in Africa is significantly challenged by loss of organic matter, of erosion, of acidification, biodiversity loss and desertification, and these are issues that reminds us that we have to do more, but also better and smarter, and we want to be a partner in all that.
Thank you very much, Minister Eide. Mr. Abildgaard, what do you see as the main barriers to ensuring sustainable food value chains?
Well, I represent Danfoss. We are a multinational company headquartered in Denmark, focusing, among other things, on sustainable cooling solutions. And if you look at the food system, the global food system today, the amount of food loss and waste is simply staggering. 15% of the food we produce is lost before it even reaches the table, and then we have another, I think more than 15% that is simply wasted. And if we could deal with that problem, we would actually be able to feed another 1 billion people with the same resources, the same environmental impact as we see today. The losses are mainly caused by poor storage and handling, so that comes challenges as I see it. The first is that we need to upscale. The second challenge, we need to do it in a way that is sustainable. because as we upscale refrigeration, it will require a lot of energy if we don't do it right. And also, the refrigerants we use, at least the traditional ones, are very, very potent climate gases. So unless we manage to upscale in a way that is sustainable, we will perhaps create more problems than we solve. So what are the barriers here? There are really two things, I think, to create a more sustainable value chain for a more sustainable cold chain. The first is to apply a much more holistic perspective. We need more system thinking, because you have to implement these solutions in a very, very complex ecosystem. It's not the technology, it's not the solutions, they are there, but it's the whole system that needs to be addressed. And then there are a number of more specific barriers, lack of infrastructure, lack of finance, lack of business models, and then perhaps the most important, and I'd love to come back to that later, which is lack of skills. So this is the work we have cut out for us.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pedersen, same question?
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very happy to be invited. And the good thing of being part of such an illustrious panel is that you don't maybe come with so many new ideas. But I would like to really highlight what has been said earlier, that from us it's a complex issue. But I would like to highlight a few or three maybe main areas where we see are the main challenges. And the one is infrastructure related, of course, the ability to be able to move goods in a secure and safe and reliable way. And that's also both when we're talking rail and road and large harbour infrastructure projects, but also, of course, energy infrastructure, to have access to energy and to be able to maintain a cold chain and to be able to add value to your produce where you produce it. And the second part is also limited access to financing, both for maybe small-scale farmers and entrepreneurs, but also financing for larger and strategic projects that are needed to be able to build this infrastructure to secure the food chain. And then the third part, which has also been mentioned in many earlier today, is also, of course, education and training and vocational training to be able to develop and to take these investments and make them sustainable. And I think the way to address these is we like to summarize it in collaboration. It's very important that both private sector and the public sector collaborate. And in Sweden, the Swedish government has just released a new reform agenda for aid and trade, looking to bring in the private sector and the public sector and to involve Swedish companies a lot more in the development assistance work, to be able to combine that knowledge that we have in the private sector to be able to contribute in these areas. And I will stop there.
Thank you very much. Minister Tembo, what are the barriers and how do we overcome them?
Yeah, thank you, and happy to be here. For us, I think number one for Africa is the issue of the negative impact of climate change. I think you've heard recently of a lot of rain in the eastern and southern part of Africa and washing away crops. The extreme end, you have drought in the SADC region. And so this is having an impact on our food value systems, but also on the ability for countries to produce food. Talking about my country, Malawi, we've had cyclones the last 5 years. So every year you have a situation where farmers grow crops, and then there is a cyclone, and then it's all washed away. We've come now to this year where we now have drought. So that is barrier number one. Barrier number two is the issue of lack of critical infrastructure. Number one, energy. We do not have, most of Malawi does not have access to energy. And so we need resources to be able to invest in our production of energy. We're talking about the Southern Africa Power Pool. If we have adequate